Dear students of class 12 in Rajshahi College and who are viewing this class at this moment, I welcome all. Today I will discuss on the non-finite verbs and the auxiliary verbs. In my previous class, I discussed on the definition and use of the finite verbs in the clauses and sentences. Both of that class and today's class are the revisions of the classes I had taken earlier of this in the earlier days after the inception of this online live class program. Well, those who attended those online classes or watched the recorded classes in the Facebook page of Rajshahi College, you can remember what I told in that class, and those who are new, I welcome and advise you to listen to the definitions and uses of the non-finite verbs and the auxiliary verbs in the sentences. By the end of the previous class, I told you that verbs make the skeleton of English sentences, and in particular finite verbs make the backbone of English sentences. That is, without a finite verb, a sentence cannot function. Without a finite verb, the assembly of words cannot be defined as a sentence. Therefore, to make even a clause, we need to have a finite verb. And in the definition and identification of finite verbs in the sentences, I told you, I think you can remember, that the verbs that are used in either of the 12 tense forms are called finite verbs. Except the finite verbs, we have some other types of verbs in the sentences, in English sentences, and they are non-finite verb and auxiliary verbs. Look at the sentences I write on the board. Look at this sentence. I am playing there and they called me. We have three verbs in this sentence. Among these three verbs, playing is written in the past continuous form with the help of be verb was. Was is the auxiliary verb. And since playing is in the past continuous tense form, we call it finite verb. And again, called is also in the past indefinite tense form, therefore it is also a finite verb. So, we have an auxiliary verb and two finite verbs in this sentence, finite 1, finite 2, and since we have two finite verbs in the sentence, this sentence has two clauses. this sentence has two clauses. In more than one clauses, I told you that the number of clauses in a sentence depends on the number of finite verbs in that sentence. That is, if a sentence has only one finite verb, it has only one clause, and if a sentence has two or three finite verbs, the sentence has two or three clauses. Anyway, our concern is identification of the verbs, and once you know the verbs, it will be easier for you to understand the English sentences well. I find a difficulty among our students, even those who are well in their merit and their examination results. They often find to interpret English sentences correctly simply because of the misinterpretation of the verbs and their time sequences. That is why it is necessary to know the usage of the verbs, particularly the non-finite verb patterns well. Otherwise, there is a fear of misinterpreting the things students read or study. Anyway, look at another sentence. Come here to take the book after finishing the job. Sentence number 2. Come here to take the book after finishing the job. You see, we do not have any subject in this sentence. The sentence has started with a verb come. That is, it is an imperative sentence. Come is the finite verb in this sentence. To take, popularly known as an infinitive. And after finishing, you see, ing is added with the base form of the verb finish, but it does not have any auxiliary verb before finishing. Therefore, we cannot determine any tense form of the verb finishing in this sentence. In other words, finishing is a verb without any particular tense forms, and popularly such verbs with an ing at the end but without any auxiliary verbs are called present participle. In fact, the infinitive verb to take or the present participle finishing are not in any particular tense form, but they express some activity. They express different activities or individual activities without any particular tense form. Such verbs are called non-finite verbs. Such verbs are called non-finite. That is, all infinitives are non-finite verbs. All present participles are non-finite verbs. And the verbs which help a finite verb, a verb that helps a finite verb to determine the verb's tense form, that is called an auxiliary verb. So today I will try to show the uses of different non-finite verbs and the auxiliary verbs. First, I discuss the uses of non-finite verbs in English sentences. Well, non-finite verbs are of three types. One, present participle. Two, past participle. And three, infinitives. Always remember that a non-finite verb is the secondary verb in a clause. I repeat, a non-finite verb is a secondary verb in a clause. That is, without a finite verb, no clause can be constructed. And in a clause, other than a mandatory finite verb, sometimes we get, not always, non-finite verbs such as I came here. In this sentence, we have a finite verb, but we do not have any non-finite verb. Again, I saw them after going there. In this sentence, we have a finite verb saw, finite, came is also a finite, and going is a non-finite verb. What type of non-finite it is? This is a present, going is a present participle. And as I have told, non-finite verbs are of three types: present participle, past participle, and infinitives. Sometimes we may get more than one clauses. For example, he came here after we finished taking tea. Look at this sentence. Came is a finite verb, finished is a finite verb, and taking is a non-finite verb. Came is in the past indefinite form, finished is in the past indefinite form, and taking is a verb without any tense form, and therefore it is a non-finite verb. Since we have two finite verbs in this sentence, the clause has two clauses. One is he came here, and the other one is we finished taking tea. In a clause, the finite verbs function as the center of the clause. Now let us go back to the discussion on non-finite verbs. You have seen that in a clause there may be, since this so I came here has only one finite verb, this sentence has only one clause. Since I saw them after going there has only one finite verb saw, the number of clauses in this sentence is 1, and in the sentence he came here after we finished taking tea, we have two finite verbs and one non-finite. Therefore, because of the presence of two non-finite verbs, we call this sentence we determine the sentence, this sentence he came here after we finished taking tea as having two clauses. Let us see the uses of the non-finite verbs in the clauses. They have a relation with the main clause, with the finite verb in the clause. That is, as I have told, a finite verb is a secondary verb in a clause. That, and thus we understand that the finite and the non-finite verbs function either earlier or later, either before or after, or even sometimes at the time of the action of the finite verb. The uses of the present participles, past participles and infinitives determines the time sequence of the non-finite verbs in relation with the finite verbs. When we have a present participle, usually the verb in the present participle form determines an action done before the action of the finite verb. That is, the verb presented in the present participle form determines an action done or happened before the action or happening of the finite verb in the normal case. For example, look at the sentences. Taking tea, he has done it. You understand that the subject he had taken tea before he had done something. However, we have this type of finite verb, this type of present participle. We know that such a present participle determines a job, determines a function or activity done before the finite verb. Look at another example. We had been weeping for their losing lives. We have two agents here. One is we, two subject agents here, we and they. They is presented in the possessive form and losing is the verb done by the subject they, and losing is in the present participle form. If you simply determine the sense of this sentence, you understand that subject we wept after someone lost lives. That is, after someone lost lives. The losing of life happened earlier, and then as a consequence, subject we makes the action of weeping. So, we see that the present participle verb or the verb in the present participle form functions before the function of the finite verb in a clause in a sentence. But there is a what we may call different use of the present participles, such as in this sentence, I saw him doing that. Look at the sentence. You make the sense of the sentence with both of the finite and the present participle verbs functioning at the same time. And in another example like this one, he found you walking alone. That is, whenever subject he, found, object you were walking at the same time. So, both of the finite verb and the present participle or non-finite verb function at the same time in this sentence. Whenever we get the object of the finite verb before the present participles like walking or doing, it determines that both of the finite verb and the non-finite present participle function at the same time. The factor is the presence of an object, the presence of the object of the finite verb before the present participle. I repeat, normally a present participle determines the function of a verb done before the finite verb, and sometimes in a different use both the finite and present participle function at the same time when there is a the object of the finite verb before the present participle. Both the finite and present participle function at the same time when there is the object of the finite verb before the present participle, like in the sentences such as he found you walking, or I saw him doing that. In these sentences, the finite verbs are found and saw, and found has the object you before the present participle walking, and saw has the object him before the present participle doing. Therefore, in the first sentence, both the present finite verb and the present participle function together. In the second sentence, both the finite verb saw and the present participle doing function at the same time. But if there is no object of the finite verb before the present participle, the present participle determines a function done before the function of the finite verbs. And what is the use of past participle? Before giving you the definition or the use of the past participle, let us look at the examples of the use of past participles in English sentences. You got the sum done. In this sentence, when you got the sum was already done. When you got the sum was already done. Or again, the boy understood or well, let me use another finite verb. The boy felt embarrassed. In your presence. That is, first you were present, then the boy was embarrassed, and after that he felt that he is embarrassed. Look, both embarrassed and done are the past participle forms of the verb do or embarrass. In both of the cases, you see the non-finite verbs or the present or the past participles function before the function of the finite verbs got or felt. So, like the use of present participle, we can say that the past participle verbs are also done before the function of the finite verb. Then what is the difference? Look, when I write a sentence with a present participle taking tea, he came, or I saw him sleeping, both of the verbs are in the active form. Both of the verbs are presented in their active forms. That is, in the first sentence, the subject actively performs taking, and in the second subject, the object, him, actively functions the work of sleeping. But in the case of past participle, the object some is presented in the passive form of the verb. A similar case is there in the second sentence. The boy felt embarrassed not because of any of his own activity or any of his own active function, but because of the function of you in the possessive form. That is, embarrassed is also in the passive form. So, though we define both the present participles and the past participles as the verbs functioning after the functioning before the function of the finite verb, the difference exists in the role of the subjects or objects of the present participles and past participles. If the subject or active subject or object of the present participle verb is active, we use the present participle, and if the verb of the if the subject or object of the non-finite verb is passive, then we use the past participle form of non-finite verbs. For active non-finite verb, we use present participle. For passive non-finite verb, we use past participle. And we have the third type of the non-finite verbs, that is infinitives. Infinitives, the verbs function after the finite verb, or the infinitive in a clause is used to determine a verb that function because of the finite verb. For example, we waited to see him. Waiting started first, and they started waiting to see when he comes or he arrives. Another example of infinitive verb is like this one. You advised him to sleep. First you advised, and then he will sleep. Sleep will happen after the finite is already done. In the understanding of the non-finite verbs, or in the presentation of non-finite verbs in your English expression, sometimes sometimes our English users wrongly use the patterns of the non-finite verbs. From now on, always bear in mind that when the secondary verb or the non-finite verb in a clause is in the present participle, or you write to determine a secondary verb within a clause, if the verb is done before the finite verb and it is an active one, use the present participle. If you want to use a non-finite verb in a single clause with another finite verb, you have to use past participle if the non-finite verb determines a passive use, and if you want to express something to happen after the finite verbs, you make sure that you need to use infinitives. And now I will go for discussing the auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verb is a secondary verb. An auxiliary verb is not a secondary verb in a clause. Rather, an auxiliary verb is the determiner of the form of the finite verb in a clause or in a sentence. That is, an auxiliary verb determines the tense form or some particular state of finite verbs. You see, when we write a sentence, I have done it. Done is the finite verb which is helped by the verb, by the auxiliary verb have, to determine the verb does being in the present perfect form. And when we have the verb do with the use of an auxiliary can, I can do this. Can is the auxiliary verb, while do is the finite verb. Finite. Well, for continuous tenses we use I am waiting. Am is the auxiliary verb helping the finite verb wait to be expressed in the present continuous form. But sometimes verbs like am or have can function as the finite verbs in the sentences when they are used not to help to express the tense form of another finite verb. For example, I am poor. In this sentence, am is not an auxiliary verb because it is not helping any other finite verb to determine the tense form of that finite verb. Am in this sentence is finite. And again, you had a friend. In this sentence, the verb to have do not take any finite verb after it to determine the finite verb's tense form. Therefore, Had is also a finite verb in this sentence. But if you wrote, you had done this, had would be an auxiliary verb and done would be the finite verb. We have 4 types of auxiliary verbs, that is, 1, verb to be, 2, verb to have, sorry, let us delete 2, be verbs such as am, is, are, was, were, determined to use in the continuous tenses in both active and passive verbs and also passive indefinite verbs. For example, I take tea. The passive form of this sentence is tea is taken by me. Here, taken is the finite verb, is an auxiliary verb. In an passive infinitive verb, in a passive indefinite verb, or in a passive verb in indefinite form, be verbs like am, is, are, was, were are used as the auxiliary verbs. We also have verbs as auxiliaries in the perfect and perfect continuous forms, both in the active and passive forms. We also a third type of finite verb, do verbs used in the negative of the present and past indefinite tense verbs and also in the interrogative sentences in the indefinite of course only active voice verbs. For example, in active voice we say I do this. In interrogative sentence we say do I do this? Sorry, let me give another example. I know him. In the interrogative sentence, do I know him? This do is the auxiliary verb. So, auxiliary do is used to present an indefinite verb, a past indefinite or a present indefinite verb in the negative form. I do not go, or you did not sleep. Both of the verbs are in the indefinite forms, and do is used in both of the sentences. In the first sentence in the present form, and in the second sentence in the past form, to determine the negative sense of the finite verb sleep or go. And finally, we have a fourth type of auxiliary verbs. They are called modals. They are not related with the tense form of the verb. Rather, modals are used to determine some particular state of the finite verbs. For example, I can do this. When you use can, when you use auxiliary can, it is a modal. It is used to determine some particular state of the finite verb do. Similarly, you need not come. This need not is an auxiliary, a modal auxiliary to determine a particular state of the finite verb come. Therefore, by modals we express some particular states of finite verbs. And in English language, we have a number of non-finite verbs, auxiliary verbs like can, may, need, to, need not, ought to, sometimes help, I cannot help doing this, and such are the uses of the modals that help the finite verb to determine the finite verb's particular states or situations. So, let us come to the conclusion of this class. I have discussed in today's class the uses of the auxiliary verbs, the definitions and uses of the auxiliary verbs and the non-finite verbs. You need to understand different types of verbs, such as the finite verbs, the non-finite verbs, and the auxiliary verbs well, to understand English sentences well when you read them, or to express your feelings in English sentences correctly. Therefore, try to follow the definitions and the uses I have given in this class and in the previous one, so that you can understand English sentences well when you study something in English, and you can express something when you need to in English well or better and correctly. And that's all. I will take a class on the different types of phrases in the next class on the 23rd of this month. That will be also another revision class, because we have already completed the things which can be discussed in the classrooms normally. If we had a direct interaction in the classrooms, we could go for some exercises in the classroom for your better understanding, perception and use of the grammar items we discuss in the online classes. But unfortunately, because of the continuation of the pandemic of COVID-19, we are not meeting in the classrooms, and thus we are trying to help you as much possible through the online classes, and I hope this will help you a little better to understand English or any other subject you attend the online classes. Thank you for today. Thank you. Stay safe, stay well, and hoping for your good days, and hoping to meet you again on the 23rd of this month. Thank you all.